So welcome to the Take a Breather podcast with Stacy Every and Eric Almeida. We are certified emotional freedom technique practitioners, and on this podcast, we discuss how EFT can help improve your mental and physical health by bringing real healing to the body and to the mind. We also have different types of practitioners visit us on the show to tell us their stories and methods about how they can facilitate deep healing. As always, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, like and subscribe to us on YouTube. That helps the podcast out a ton. And today I'd like to introduce Shannon Wade. She is the owner of Holistic Health Strategies located in Haydenville, Massachusetts. She is a licensed massage therapist, physical therapist assistant, and a birth doula, and provides holistic support for peri and postmenopausal women. Welcome so much, Shannon, to the podcast.
Hi, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Ditto. And I'm going to kick it off to Stacy. Go ahead with the first question.
Yeah, so it is so lovely to have you here. So Shannon and I went to massage school together, and I'm really excited to pick your brain about some things that you've introduced me to originally, actually, in massage school. So first of all, how about you tell us a bit about who you are and your background and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Shannon. I like to make sure when I think about this that I'm not just talking about what I do for work, because I feel like that's only a portion of me and who I am. So I'm from Western Massachusetts. My family is a long time in Western Massachusetts. I live in Goshen, and I'm married. My husband is George, and I have 2 grown children, boys that are in their 20s, and they both have skipped town and lived together out in Spokane, Washington. And I started working in the healthcare field at a very young age, like right out of college at the age of 21. So my entire life's work has been something related to health field, starting off in physical therapy as a PT assistant, and working in that job for many, many years with the great luck of being able to get involved with many very smart manual therapists that really just, opened up a whole world of body work to me that I never even knew existed. It just kind of blew my mind, and didn't even know that, that could be a direction in my life. So I feel overall like I've just been very lucky in the way things have unfolded. So after many years, I decided to get my license in massage therapy as well. Kind of in an effort to look for a little bit more independence in my work, and also added in the birth doula work as well. All the while with an interest in birth, women's health, pelvic health. A lot of times I see my interests wane with maybe what is going on with me and where I am in my life, and noticing now that, the peri to postmenopause journey is something that is very understated, and something that I would like to start bringing a little bit more to the forefront and in my work, and supporting people through that time. So I've studied so many different manual therapy techniques that I could bore you with an entire list.
Well, I wouldn't be bored, but other people might not want to geek out over it quite as much as you and me.
Exactly. But like the core things that I've studied have been in the realm of visceral manipulation, neural manipulation, visceral vascular manipulation, which is all the work of Jean-Pierre Barral and the Barral Institute. And I've also studied the craniosacral therapy through Upledger, and branched out into I have a certificate in personal training, and I love doing the work with that Gary Gray and the Gray Institute does. Their whole focus is on functional movement, and it was a real paradigm shift, taking a class with them and really learning that aspect of how to interact with the body, in a true to form way, not what I was taught in physical therapy school.
Interesting. Oh my gosh, I didn't even know about. There's so many things I want to ask you about. Oh my gosh.
I know. Personally, I have. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, when you finish your comment, Shannon, but for the people who aren't trained massage therapists like myself and lots of the listeners, maybe define a few of these things, because I totally was
Right.
yeah. So like visceral massage, I totally misinterpreted what that meant.
Awesome. I love it. And I love that you'll continue to bring me back to not speaking to, like Stacy said, geeky about things, because I can do that.
I was only thinking for myself when it came to the geeking, actually, but
no. I'll put myself in there.
Okay, good.
Oh no, it's fine to geek out. As long as I know what the heck you guys are talking about, I'm fine with it. So
I know from so visceral neurovascular manipulation and the functional movement, all of those are probably not known by too many people. So I don't know if you want to take us through a little summary of each one, and then we'll just pick the one I think that one of us thinks is most interesting.
Sure. So like I said, the visceral, the neural, the vascular work is all the work of Jean-Pierre Barral, who's a French, he's an osteopath from France. I guess he's also French, but that's what I would prefer to say. He's an osteopath from France. And he just has this incredible, mind and intuition into sort of interacting with the body in a way that is really gives you the ability to read the tissues in the body, so that you can follow the lead and figure out where the body needs to have a little bit of help in adjusting things. So in visceral manipulation, what that is referring to is more specifically working with the fascial relationships around organs. So organs are visceral, and that could be anything from the throat all the way down to the bottom of the digestive system, all of the reproductive system organs, and anything in between. So they all have a relationship to each other and to themselves. And so if everything is in a fluid ability to move, then the body itself can function better and can move better. So I came to it from a more mechanical point of view, having the body mechanics, the working really with the musculoskeletal system that's more traditional of physical therapy. There's a term actually that people use for visceral manipulation. They call it liquid osteopathy.
Interesting.
Which is interesting, because I hadn't thought about that term until just now for a long time. But so it's like still working with you're used to working with the muscles and the bony hard frame. But when you're talking about spine movement and a person is having pain when they bend over, if there's tensions around the organs, like let's just pick on the liver in particular, because the liver itself, which is over here on the majority of the right side of your rib cage area, is a huge organ, has a lot of surface space, has a lot of interactions with a lot of different structures in your body. So let's say that there's a fascial restriction in that organ, or in that organ's relationship to one of those neighbors, and then you go to bend over and it catches. The body isn't going to just keep going and say, well, we'll just damage the liver in this process. The body's going to say, let's turn a little this way and let's go down a little this way and get around that restriction. Or it's going to give you pain and say, don't do that. And that's going to show up sometimes in a disc issue, or, a muscle spasm, or, lots of different things that then you're like, oh, well, if we got the organ moving a little bit better, then your bending over happens a little easier. And then, you don't have the strain on the musculoskeletal system in the same way.
That is so interesting, because I have never, ever heard of that as a possibility for skeletal problems, that it's the body auto-correcting to protect the organs because they're like knotted up or something. That might be not the right term, with the fascia inside. So the body's kind of like, we're just going to tweak a little bit so that you don't end up like, yanking this particular part of the fascia of this particular organ. I've never heard that as a possible explanation. it's always it always just seems like carpentry. It just always like there's just a structure.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
So I assume it can go both ways, where a person may have back pain from compensating for organ fascia restrictions. So they end up with disc problems because they're moving in an unhealthy way around the restrictions. So the disc issue is actually a symptom of organ restrictions rather than anything inherently wrong with the back at all. That's what you're saying?
I think that's entirely what I'm saying, and it sounds like a very reasonable possibility to me.
So, and I assume this would go the other way too, where what was I just thinking about? Yeah, the other way. So I assume there's also like, can in fact the restrictions, so I assume organ restrictions can cause musculoskeletal problems in other parts of the body that originate with the organ restrictions, and now you have pain elsewhere. And you try to work on the pain elsewhere, and nothing happens because it's actually caused by originally a restriction in the organ. So people are like basically barking up the wrong tree on a regular basis with pain they may be having in their body because they're not addressing the organs. Oh my goodness. Think of all my clients. So many clients. I haven't thought of visceral manipulation to work with. Yeah, I have to send them all to Shannon. But am I right then?
You are. And the other side of that is like the other way that I think you may have been indicating, and you can tell me if I'm on the right track here, is like, if there is an overdevelopment of a muscle, could that create a restriction?
Sorry, yeah, just for listeners, Shannon's internet's in and out. So no, sorry. Could you say that again? We got about half of it.
So great. Okay. So if there's a restriction in a muscle, if there's a contraction, an issue in the muscle, could that position the body in a place that then affects the organ? So there can be like a two-way street happening here. And that's one of the things that I love about the work that Jean-Pierre has done, is that he teaches you some techniques that's called listening, is the technique, which you do with your hands, not with your ears. And it gives you an ability to find the body's area of greatest restriction. So I can come to the body and be like, well, I see this and I see that, and I watch the way you move, and I can create all these, cognitive things based on my personal experiences with clients. And then I can do the listening to the body, and I may come up with exactly what I saw, or I may come up with something completely different. Like I might be like, okay, this person is having, let me think of a good example. Let's just say low back pain. And I do a listening, and I discover that the tensions are pulling into the liver, and that the liver, when we release the liver, then it changes that whole musculoskeletal, alignment ability, and then the back pain can shift. That makes it sound very simple. In some cases it is. Most people, it's not simple, because it's layers upon layers upon layers of dysfunction that has been happening for long periods of time. So sometimes it's a lot of work to get things to unwind and come to a level. But sometimes it's miraculous for people. They're like, whoa, I don't know what you just did, but like my back felt totally better after that last visit. And I've had, all sorts of different other kinds of musculoskeletal treatment, in the past that wasn't working. And so not to say that those modalities aren't appropriate, because they totally are, I believe, I love that there are 100 million different, modalities to work with a body, because they're all important. They all serve a purpose. And it's just a matter of figuring out what are the nuances that your body needs. Which is part of why I've probably studied a lot of different things, because I'm realizing I need a little tool to affect that, and a little tool to affect that, and a little tool to affect that. And how do you pull it all together and figure it out in one person's body?
Yeah. So with that in mind, so now I'm wondering what the heck neural and vascular manipulation are, because if it's manipulating the neurology, okay, go ahead. I want to know.
Yeah. So think of it more anatomically and fascially, keep the mind in that sort of place, because basically neural manipulation is working with the nerve and the layers of the nerve and the relationship of the nerve with its its structures that it's passing by and through. And same thing with the vascular, so it's especially vascular, there's in the arterial system, there's musculature in the tubes, and then the tubes can, they have structures that they're moving around and near and through, and all of that can be adjusted to allow for better movement. So I think of like organs, nerves, and blood vessels. If you think about like a hierarchy of importance in a body, they're pretty important. And not that I don't love bones and muscles, because I do, but I see them as a little bit, they have a little bit more expendability, if that makes sense, right? You can break a bone, you can tear a muscle, you can strain a muscle, and they're easier to recover from than if you were to say rupture your spleen.
Well, for sure, even, yes, in that particular sense, absolutely. But, our muscles are designed to tear when they're purposely to then grow. You can't say that about your spleen, or our arteries are not designed to be ruptured to then do something crazy. You'll just bleed out either internally or outside of your body. And yeah, you screw with your nerves, you're just gonna be in excruciating pain, or you'll just lose function in some part of your body. So that makes more sense what you're saying, that there's that expendability, because it's like the whole purpose of
their design.
Because of their design. Muscles are designed, if you work them out, you're tearing the fibers of the muscles, and then they grow bigger and stronger, and thus that's the kind of the point. But all of our other, even our bones are designed that you put more strain on them and the bones get stronger as a way. I forget what that's called. What is it? Cytoplast? For some reason, there's a word popped in my head. I'm not even sure if that's even accurate or have anything to do with bones. But
Bernadette's like dying that we don't remember the name for that, Shannon.
Oh,
like the osteoblasts. Osteoblasts are the bone building cells.
But yeah,
that's what you mean.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yeah. Yes, that the impact on the bones makes the bones stronger, which honestly sounds counterintuitive. You're like, wait, I'm going to break my bones if I impact them. It's like, no, they actually get stronger, and the less you impact your bones, the weaker your bones get, and thus you can break easier. But that's not that doesn't apply to nerves or organs or arteries and veins and things like that.
Right. So they need protection. Right.
Sure.
They need protection
from the bones and muscles.
From the bones and the muscles. Right. And so the bones and the muscles, they can do the adjustments to accommodate around things that are not moving well in the organs, nerves, and vascular system. So, right. So it's just a matter of when the process of dysfunction starts to happen in the bones and the muscles, how do you really address all the different possibilities of what's going on in the body?
And that's where I think of our work, Eric. I mean, my brain went to down the line of who your client would be, who some of your clients might be. And I assume someone with digestive issues should certainly pursue some sessions with you, but that it's not as simple as restrictions around the organs. It's the emotional states that we get into with stress, anxiety, fear, that creates the tension in the gut and in the belly that then lead to restrictions in the digestive system, and then leads to, I assume, a host of digestive issues that are chronic in today's society but that it could easily start with the muscles we are upset and anxious, and that tightens our muscles, and then the organs suffer. Does that sound something you do work with clients?
Yeah, so I'm glad to let's make that shift. So we were kind of talking about kind of what happens in the relationship between a fascial tension around an organ or a nerve or a blood vessel to to the rest of the body and sort of maybe a pain situation or a functional limitation or what have you. But why do organ dysfunctions happen? I tend to live my life and work with a fair amount of a sense of humor. So sometimes I respond to my clients with a little bit of a smart aleck, response when they're like, well, why is this happening? And I might say something like, it beats the hell out of me. But I say that because the answer is not always clear. And in our society, we're always like, what's the answer? What's the diagnosis? What's the answer? And sometimes we just don't ever know like the full answer. And so that's kind of my way of starting with like, I don't really know, but I can give you some ideas of what might be going on. Now, something obvious would be, let's say there was a surgical intervention. Somebody had a hysterectomy. You take out the uterus, there's scar tissue, through all the layers of the abdomen, the muscles, the fascia, the peritoneum, all of that. And then you remove an organ, which, there's not just a space left where the uterus used to be. Everything shifts and the tensions change in order for, because that's, it spills in the space. Oftentimes, the small intestine like drops down into that space, bladders start to drop back, rectums start to drop forward, things start to shift. And that can create strain on different parts of the body. So, the rectum is sitting right in front of the sacrum. So the sacrum is that low part. You guys still got me?
We got you back.
We got you back.
You guys still got me? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what you missed, but all of a sudden you froze again.
It sounded, I caught the thread, so hopefully.
Yeah, the organs moving, and you're talking about the rectum affecting the sacrum.
Sacrum.
Yeah, so the sacrum, which is, in the low part of the back side of the pelvis, and the rectum sits right in front of that. So if that's like getting pulled forward, that's going to pull fascially on the sacrum. So it's like, well, what's happening there? How can we work with, the fascial tension so that it's not pulling so much, just as like one example. So surgical intervention, certainly an issue. Also, I like to think about like what happens to our organs through our lives when we have things like a fall. Let's say we land hard on our butt when we're ice skating. Never mind the conversation about what happens to the tailbone and the nervous system as a result of that. Mm-hmm. But let's just think about the organ piece of things, right? You can kind of think about the organs are like a jello in the bowl, right? And when that bowl hits the ground hard, the organs are all like in a whiplash effect with that. And the strain patterns that can happen, can show up in a multitude of ways, depending on the angle, what was going on in that person beforehand, and so on and so forth. Then you can take it into the realm of the emotional part of things and how we store our emotions in our organs. It's not just a coincidence that we talk about like our heart with love and our stomach with stress, or ulcers with stress that happen in our stomach, or we have gut reactions. Like those are like our intuitive ways of understanding that our emotions are, being stored in our organs. And, there's so much, conversation that can go on around that, but, how does that then, create, a situation in an organ that then sets off a whole pattern, of potential things in the body.
So I'm curious, because you guys, the two of you know more about fascia than I do. This is still a newer word for my vocabulary. Is fascia simply, is it just connective tissue similar to a tendon or a ligament, or is it more like a muscle where like there is some form, there can be some form of conscious or subconscious like movement around? Like, does that make sense? What I'm trying to ask, like, is it a static connective tissue where it's connected, it's there, and if it gets angry, it gets angry, or is it something where it can move and contract as part of the way it's built? I honestly have no idea.
It's a great question, and I feel like I might get. I feel like I can only touch on the very edge of that, I guess.
Okay, that's fine.
In my real understanding, because it is so complicated. The more I read about it, the more I'm like, holy cow. But I liked, if you think about the like fascia, it's there is proprioceptive connections to that. So proprioception is just sort of like your body, and brain connection and understanding like what's happening. So from a real like kind of maybe easy to understand, like if I put my hand behind my back and I am making like a thumbs up, I can't see my hand, but I know that that's what I'm doing with my body part, right? So that's kind of my proprioceptors, my like that's getting transmitted back to my brain. Well, that's happening throughout your body in ways that we don't have conscious connections to always. Some people have way more than others, but in our whole the nervous system, obviously we don't know, we really don't know much about it when it like comes right down to it. I mean, we know there's a lot of work out there, but there's just so much that's just hard to fully understand. So going back to like the fascia, I think of it like a web, and it's interacting around every bone, muscle, organ, blood vessel, nerve. And and one of the things that it's doing is it has like this, if you look at it microscopically, you can really see like the fluid within that structure. And you can, I think of it as like as a surface that kind of helps like one structure move against another. And it also adds to the structure. It adds to how things are held. So I don't think of it as like a ligament or a tendon. That was the other thing. Those easy words. But in some areas, there's lots of layers of fascia that come together and they form a more tensile structure that has more tensile strength than in other parts of the fascial system. So it's like doing like this funny dance in between kind of two areas there.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And that it's not it isn't static. I think that was one word you suggested, Eric. It's a constantly evolving and changing web of thickening and thinning and hydrating and lack of hydration, and it's like a constant extra cushion around everything. It's cushion. It's grease about the fluidity of movement, and scar tissue basically is fascia built, like fascial restriction, right? That's what that is. We call them adhesions in massage therapy. But when you have a knot in your neck, that's a buildup of it's basically scar tissue fascia.
Interesting. That's because that's something that like when you learn very basic biology, like you'll see like what the inside of the body looks like, but you don't. There's like this assumption that all this stuff's just kind of chilling there, and in actuality, the fascia is kind of like keeping this over here and keeping that over there, and allowing these two organs to rub against each other without actually damaging the organ walls and like all that kind of stuff. And we're missing all of that kind of like, you kind of need that part. It's it's the jello of the fruit salad jello. Like it holds everything together so they're not whacking against each other, and it keeps them kind of semi-suspended. Yeah, interesting.
Exactly.
So at risk of ruining chicken for anybody.
I know you're going with this.
That white stuff that you peel off?
When you're peeling the skin off, right? There's that sheer white, that's fascia. And if you were to inspect your chicken further, you would find that there's these sheer layers. Yes, I have dissected my chicken.
Because it's so interesting.
You'll see there's like they're sheer. Some of them are just like spider webs
That's
of
so interesting.
tissue, and that's the fascia. And of course, it's in a
Oh,
structure that has been deceased for a while. Who knows
sure.
how long sometimes. Um,
It's
depends on
chicken.
where
Not to
you
ask
get your
too many
chicken.
questions, yeah.
So I personally have never done, I've done a cadaver dissection multiple times, which I just,
Human or chicken?
human.
I have a friend who's told
That's
me
impressive that you got access to that as for
There's
in
cla-
your
there's-
particular modality.
there's classes that anyone can take, actually. If you want to,
What?
if I have a friend who's a melt instructor. I don't know if you know anyone who does melts.
No
It's
idea.
it's soft roller. It's using a soft roller to help fascial release, fascial restrictions, and she and a bunch of her cohorts all did cadaver classes to learn more about fascia. And she's like, Stacy, you should do it. It's amazing. And I haven't done it yet because
I thought
I
only medical
haven't.
students had access to cadavers. I didn't realize it was more.
You can take a class you can sign up. I mean, if something I know what's going on with COVID right now, but there are classes available to just anybody, any
That's crazy.
Not
I
at
had
all.
I just had no idea. I just had no idea the
Totally.
access was more open than I thought. I
Yep.
really thought it's like the only way you're getting to a cadaver is either the funeral home or med school. I didn't realize there was like a third option of just being like, hey, you want to learn some more? Here's a cadaver. Like,
Yeah. So interestingly enough, like all the cadavers that I've ever had an interaction with in dissection situations. This conversation could go bad really quickly.
oh, it's fine. We have like 3 episodes on the intricacies of death, so just have fun with it.
We kind of talk. We
Anyway,
kind of say whatever we feel.
I'm gonna pause for a second because. Okay, good. So all the interactions I've ever had have been in connection with actually the local physical therapy school programs, and actually we went in our massage therapy class to a cadaver class, just to the lab.
I wasn't able to go. I was so sad.
Oh, you weren't there
I
that
missed
day.
it.
Oh, that's
I forget
such a
why I couldn't.
bummer.
It was a total bummer. I was very disappointed.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
in those circumstances, you know, the cadavers that I've interacted with have been already dissected by the physical therapy class, and then we've gone in when they're done with the cadavers and had opportunities to kind of look through different things. And you know, and I say our, which this is people that I used to work with. Our interest was to go and look at, you know, like really to get a sense of the relationships of organs and so on. Because, you know, when you're just looking at this in a Netter's anatomy book and it's, you know, 2-dimensional and you can't get the sense of, you know, really how things are interacting with each other, the cadaver experience is phenomenal in that case. You get some sense of fascia in that case, kind of similar to the chicken, but you know, the bodies have been preserved, and that changes the fluidity of the tissue and so on and so forth. So one of the things that I have on my bucket list that someday I may do is through the Barral Institute. They offer twice a year, or at least when life was normal. I don't know what's happening now. They offer twice a year a fresh cadaver dissection. So these cadavers have not yet been, you know, there's no formaldehyde, there's no, or whatever the chemicals are that they're using now. And so, yeah, exactly. And so you get even a more, you know, enhanced experience with what's happening with the fascia. You know, my only experience so far is just I have watched videos that people have shown around some of the cadaver dissection classes that have happened in the past. And so I just have that sort of a visual. But it's, yeah, fascia is just, I think there's more and more conversation about it now. And I think that, you know, you're going to start hearing more about it, you know, as people are really understanding the importance of that whole system.
It's such a recent development. I mean, we were in massage school 7 years ago, and and fascia was mentioned, but still the language is talking about muscles, tendons, ligaments, and bones.
Myofascia.
Yeah, exactly. And the conversation is not explicit about, I mean, again, the conversation was in there, and God goodness knows it was the best education you could get at the time as far as the understanding of the body and how it works. But I think there's just, it's way more important that we don't really have access to muscles. People think, oh, you're massaging my muscle. Kind of, mostly I'm massaging your fascia, and that's affecting your muscle, but I don't really have a lot of direct access to your muscles, because they're really well protected. And you know, and even in school they talk about, you know, you massage the psoas or massage the QL. Like, you're not really massaging, they're so deep. You're affecting the fascial restrictions that lead to, you know, that are around those muscles, that lead to those muscles. But you're not, but not to say that the massage isn't effective, but understanding of what's happening is, I think, is a bit, the picture's a bit limited about what's really happening with our bodies. And it says to me also how important it is to be aware of this, because as you said, you know, fascia, there's so much about fascia we don't even understand on a scientific level. But I've read some really intriguing articles about it, as far as the sensory cells in the fascia that seem to operate independently of our nervous system, and they seem to have their own, like, that there's a lot of sensory information being taken in from the environment by cells in the fascia, and that information is like told to our nervous system, rather than our nervous system telling. We have this idea of our, you know, our brain tells, and our nervous system tells the cells what to do, but actually the fascia tells our brain what to do instead. Like, it's much more fluid, a back and forth. There's more, our body has more ability to understand what's happening in the world, and it seems the fascia seems to be a huge part of it, than our nervous system does, per se, if I'm making sense. But there's like individual sensory cells that are kind of doing their own data gathering information, and that that our hands and the cells in our hands, our own fascial cells, interact with the sensory fascial cells of our clients. And there's this conversation that happens. So we say we can release the psoas, even though we're not touching it, because there's this weird conversation between my fascia and of my hands and the fascia of the person's body that needs, you know, it needs a certain kind of stimulation. It's not all mechanical. It's not just, I'm going to push this muscle into submission. It's, I'm going to tell this muscle it'd be a good idea, or I'm going to tell this fascia it's a good idea if this area softens, and here's guidance in how to do that, but I'm not forcing it. So I'm not making it happen with my hands. Am I making sense?
Yeah. That definitely makes sense. And it's, again, it's like diving into like this, you know, abyss of this place that is so vast that, you know, we're just starting to learn about and truly understand. So it's like, you know, I've been doing this work for a very long time, and to say that I understand what's happening all the time, I put a huge amount of trust in my, you know, in my hands, in my past experiences, you know, the stories that I've heard from other people. You know, like, there is a lot of trust, you know, because I acknowledge that there is so much that, you know, we just can't understand yet because it's so complicated.
And that it's something our brains aren't going to understand, because it's something our hands understand. Like, like your hands literally learn something and know something that our brains don't really know how to do. Our hands do it for us.
Right. So going back to the like the evaluatory, is that the word? Tool.
The listening thing you were talking
about.
The
listening technique, right? So it's like, you know, trusting what that is telling me and following that lead and getting out of my brain, you know, while I'm working in that tissue. Because if I go in there with an agenda, I'm going to do a disservice. Oh, so sorry. I'm going to do a disservice to the tissue. You know, I need to trust that the body knows the best course of action here. And so I'm coming in to facilitate and say, well, how about if I, you know, like you're saying you want to pull that way, let me take you that way. And then what message does that then send through whatever layers of fascial cells or what have you, with, you know, and in communication with the nervous system. And then what kind of change then does start to happen as a result of that. So visceral manipulation is not a very aggressive type of technique at all. You know, it's you know, if you've worked with craniosacral, you know, people talk about like 5 grams of pressure. 5 grams of pressure is like the weight of a nickel. So that's not a lot of you know, pressure. With visceral work, the how do I want to say it? Like the ability to kind of come in to contact an organ, as well as we can ever contact anything in a body, like what's kind of going back to what Stacy was saying, may require a certain level of depth into the body, but it's not pressure that's being applied. So there's a way to you can kind of even just do this with like any type of a muscle. Like you can put your finger on a muscle, and you can like start to think. If I think push, there's one thing that happens. But if I think sink into that structure, there's another thing that happens. It's slower. It takes a little bit more time to get there, but I can get to a depth within that structure that is ultimately the same place without with the welcoming of the tissue, without the reaction of the tissue, if that makes sense. But then the work on the organ itself is still like in that very light realm of contact. So, you know, I'm not ever coming into a liver and like saying, we're gonna go this way now. I think you can imagine how the body would react.
Sure. So that's so interesting, that different dynamic, like you were saying, between like the push and the sink, because the sink is more like you're being invited into the space by the body of the client, compared to push, where it's just, I'm just going whether you want me here or not. And so that's very fascinating. And that also explains, like what you're saying, that the amount of pressure is so light, because it's not necessary. Because when the body is letting you in, you don't have to, you're not fighting against resistance. It's more like it's being responsive to you and doing and kind of doing the heavy lifting on your behalf, compared to you having to, like, you know, drill in to dig out a knot or something like that, where you're really kind of, there's a lot of resistance. That's so interesting.
Yeah, I like to think in the terms of working with the tissues as opposed to on the tissues. You know, it's like one simple word change, but it is a huge difference in actually what's happening.
Absolutely. Because even in our world, in the mental health world, you can't force someone to deal with something, because they will resist with every ounce of strength they have. And it's the same thing with our bodies. If you try to do something our bodies don't want to do, our bodies will lock up and just be like, get the hell out of here.
Yep.
It feels like the paradigm shifts we need for medicine across the board, right? It's about that, because rather than, you know, hierarchy, top centered, I know what's best for you, I'm going to dive in and force this to make your body is broken, I'm going to go in and fix it, I'm going to cut it, I'm going to, you know, do these invasive procedures. It's about the body has wisdom, the body knows what it needs, let's collaborate and achieve that goal together with the most most easeful way possible for all concerned. And it's about just respect. It's respect for the body, and that it can heal and doesn't need to be treated. It should, in fact, you're treated disrespectfully. There's all these terrible negative repercussions. I mean, sort of like, just like you were saying about the hysterectomy, with all these possible terrible negative repercussions on the body from taking away that organ. So it's just, yeah, how much better it would be to find solutions that respect the body.
Sure.
But I think it is a move that's happening, though.
True. I was going to say, I hear all the, I hear everything that is behind the words that you're not saying. Because I've experienced that same thing, and that same, like sort of wondering of like, how can I have this, this awareness and this not be like a broader awareness. So of course I love it when I'm, having conversation with people who are like-minded. And it's a real challenge in reality, because, you're not always talking with people who are like-minded. And so, figuring out how to sort of stay, stay grounded in knowing like what you're doing is something that is, providing a benefit, and trying not to get wrapped up in the frustration of how everything is going in the rest of the world. And believe me, without saying too much, I'm helping somebody right now who is having some, significant medical circumstances. And so I'm up to my eyeballs right now in doctors and such. And it's a struggle to try to find that balance. And so that's another part of what I try to advocate for, my clients, or give them at least the ability to advocate for themselves, which then is a little, we don't have to go into more conversation about doula work at all, because I'm happy to stay where we are. But I feel like that's what a doula,
I was going to say that's right into like being a doula is that thing you were just talking about. So I don't know if you don't mind, I would love to talk about it a little bit, because it does segue so beautifully.
And I would love to like think about like a doula as something that, isn't just for a birthing person, but for people in general, like a medical doula, or, there's definitely people who work around, end of life care.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of death doula. Death doula, yeah.
Like, what about navigating the systems? Yeah, exactly. But, so how do we navigate all these systems in between?
Could you do a little definition of doula? Because I'm not sure everyone who's listening might necessarily know what a doula is.
Yeah, so doulas, they're where doulas typically are now. They're working with as either like a birth doula or a postpartum doula. That is your, most common aspect of doula work. And so I work as a birth doula. And what that means is that I'm, people are hiring me while they are pregnant. And I spend time to, getting to know them over the course of their pregnancy, and learning, who are they, what are their needs, how can I support them? And it's, super individualized, because everybody's coming from a different place. And so with the goal of being able to be present at their birth, and helping, giving them an opportunity for like a continuous support person, somebody who's going to be there when the shifts are happening at the hospital. And there's some birds in my window. I don't know if that's making a lot of noise.
It just sounds nice over your speakers, actually. Okay. Oh, what a lovely tweeting in the background. I had a rainstorm come through on my end. I don't know if you all heard that. So it's just a lot.
I saw you look, but I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, it was lots of rain on my end.
So anyway, so with the doula, like being that continuous support person that's there the entire time. And having conversations ahead of time of how to handle circumstances that come up. So when a person is in labor, they're not going to be in their objective thinking brain. That is going to be, and their partner maybe a little bit more in their objective thinking brain, but not as much as maybe a third person who is completely removed emotionally from the circumstance, but has taken the time to like really get to know these people and what their needs are, and how to help them interact in those circumstances. Depending on where you're having a baby depends on how important a doula is. So we are so blessed to have a new birth center that's in Florence. I don't know if you're aware of it, but
I heard about it. Yes, I'm so happy to hear, since I actually had my twins at the birthing center at Holyoke Hospital, but
which has closed.
Which closed. So which made me very sad. They were actually lovely. So I'm very excited to hear about this birthing center in Florence. I don't know much about it though at this point.
Well, I mean, it's such a it's independent of the hospital, but with a relationship, in the case of an emergency, of being able to transfer to the Cooley Dickinson Hospital. And it's like a safer, I don't know if I don't want to use the wrong words, but it's an option in between a home birth and a hospital birth.
Okay.
It's more like a home. The midwives are there, you go there, you don't stay there for very long, you don't stay for 3 days, or there's no given, you're usually there for a few hours after the baby's born, maybe like 5 or 6 hours, and then you go home. So it's like being more, having more of the experience of like a home birth, but not in your home. So then there's the benefit of having all the things that they have available, like gorgeous big tubs that you could have babies in that you don't have at home, and things like that. And plus they've done a great job of setting up this beautiful space. And so, at risk of putting myself out of ever having an opportunity to go to Seven Sisters again as a doula, they're so wonderful that you almost don't need a doula, to a certain extent. The side that is still missing is that they don't have the ability to have the opportunity to get to know you as well ahead of time. So there's a little bit of that disconnect. So if you're really needing that support and continuity, a doula still comes in.
It seems like doulas sprung up because of the lack of birthing centers and having only a hospital option. And that's what the doula is really, again, at risk of offending people who are listening, like it's to protect the mother and father's interests and the kind of birth they'd like to have to some degree, or at least supporting, maybe protect them isn't the very nice word to use.
Yeah.
I guess support them in finding the ways to have the kind of birth they want to have in a medical setting.
Yeah, I would definitely change those words because a doula is not there to advocate for the client. Like doulas should not be stepping in and saying like, my client says, and this, having that kind of an interaction with a practitioner at the hospital. It's there, you're there to be like, okay, so this is maybe help translate information because the nurse or the doctor or the midwife is busy moving from one situation to another. They're like, well, what did they say? Okay, well, this is what they're saying is happening, and this is why they're saying that. Here's what we've talked about, like, how do we find out more about that information? How can we slow down the process so we can have more time to think about what's happening? And is this necessary at this moment? Or is this like, are we running into like hospital policy or, tea time? Golf tea time, that is.
Yep. So just as a point of clarification, so it sounds like a doula is acting almost like an educated friend. Like they know more about the process and they're there to support you, but they don't really get involved. There's a supportive role primarily, compared to a midwife who. Does a midwife actually facilitate the birth itself? Like actually catches the baby in a home birthing situation? Okay.
Correct.
So that's the distinction between those two entities.
So a doula is a non-medical support person.
Got it. Okay.
So in that case, like I can bring in my massage therapy skills, I can bring in my movement and positioning and body work skills into that space, but I am not at all responsible or partaking in any of the medical care. And that is what a midwife does.
Okay. So it's interesting. So in a previous podcast episode, Stacy and I were talking about the loss of elders from our society. And it seems like a doula almost acts as a birthing elder, that they are there to give support and guidance, but that's it. Like it's similar to like, in the past, you'd have the mother and the grandmother and the great grandmother, and they'd be like, what you're going through is normal, and this happened to me, and you'll be okay, and be like, oh, maybe we should do this, maybe move, maybe shift your position here. That might be more like that kind of stuff. And that's
exactly
kind of, it's because of the medical world that's been lost because, like you said, the doctors and the nurses just being like, all right, we've got 5 pregnant women who are all about to give birth, and we're hopping from person to person to person, being like, all right, you're this many centimeters, I'm going to move on from you. All right, the baby's coming out right now, I'm going here for right now, the nurse, check on the rest of them. Like they're juggling a lot of people.
Yeah. And I would love to, like, do a hat tip to, like, nurses and midwives, especially, who are there. I mean, there are some wonderful, wonderful, very attentive practitioners out there. And the local hospitals, well, I say local, the hospitals I mostly go to, I don't feel like maybe, I don't know if I should keep dropping names. I already said the name of the birth center.
Your call.
But anyways, the hospitals that I typically attend births at, they have moved into having basically like dedicated nurses. So for their entire shift, like they have one client. And that's wonderful, so they have this awesome, this awesome
Any of
continuity.
us would want a personalized care in a hospital setting. Birth,
exactly.
surgery, accidents, instead of being like, I'm the new resident because the other resident left or something like that. Oh my God, for sure.
So so there's still shift change that will happen, but there's for that entire shift, they're there for you. So that is a wonderful step in a direction that was not the case when I like 7-8 years ago when I first started doing work in the doula field. So that's been a nice shift. And there's been a lot of we just have a wonderful area for having supportive birth experiences. So it's kind of a nice place. So I don't have any experiences working outside of Western Massachusetts as a doula. And I've heard just because of groups that I belong to and such, I've just heard so many things about I think I see something reflecting in your glasses, and maybe it was I thought it was something behind me reflecting on my screen, but now I think it was reflecting in your glasses. That was weird. Sorry.
Oh, me?
There's a ghost.
Maybe there was somebody. Yes, maybe there was somebody behind me. Distracted. But anyways, and now I don't even know what I was saying.
About talking with to groups of
you're
people
talking to
outside the state.
Yes, in other parts of the country where there's just stories that make your toes curl. About things that are happening in labor and delivery circumstances. So I'm super, again, thankful that we have such a progressive, lovely area for so many different things. Sometimes I feel like I should just move and take my services where they're more needed. But so another part of doula work is postpartum doula, and so those doulas are working more in going into the home with helping out with all sorts of things from breastfeeding to light housework and maybe some meal planning or baby holding, or sometimes they do overnight stays. So helping out people in those supportive ways, and kind of going back to what you were saying, Eric, where in a day gone by, we had a certain, sort of more community experience around, pregnancy, labor, young family time, which is not necessarily the case. People are now living, thousands of miles away from all of their family.
Oh, for sure, because
have that.
Yeah, in the not too distant past, like people had relationships with their doctor, like their primary care doctor, like would go to church with them, or they'd intimately know each other, and there was more of a personal relationship. And nowadays, it's like, you see your primary care doctor once a year, and then if you go see a specialist, it's the first time you've ever meet them, maybe the last time you ever meet them, and a lot of it in the medical world has become very transactional, and it's just kind of like, you're just another person having a baby, and it's just kind of like, all right, we'll get the baby out and that'll be it, and then we move on to the next person. So I guess to each their own, like which is better, which is worse kind of thing, because there is more medical expertise nowadays. There's more, there's definitely more the ability of like, if your one doctor in the town sucked at giving at doing births that you're kind of stuck compared to today, where it's like, you just hop around and find the right hospital that works for you, or go out of your region and stuff like that. So it's just kind of different, and it's adjusting to it all.
Like most things, just finding a balance.
Having a doula, I mean, gosh, I'm thinking of, do you use your massage at all for your clients if they ask?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I work a lot with different acupressure points. There's a lot of things that you can do along that lines for, now there's a fighter jet flying by.
We can't hear it, actually.
That we didn't hear.
Oh, okay.
Your microphone is good. It's
Okay.
just keeping us with you and not the fighter jet.
Okay, good. So there's a lot of acupressure points that are super helpful with different stages of labor. I'll use some of those. I call a lot on my understanding of body mechanics and movement and positioning during pregnancy, to help people know that, like, if they want to squat during labor, that they can squat, that their knees will allow them, or how do we support it so that they're not hurting themselves during that time, and giving them opportunities for different positioning, and things that they can be doing during pregnancy in order to facilitate optimal fetal positioning as well, so that the dance of the mother and the baby during labor, is happening as smoothly as possible.
I know the research that I've seen, I know there's it's hard to have any kind of control group about it because of the nature of it, but that women who have doulas tend to have much better outcomes. And I assume a huge piece of it is simply feeling supported and not afraid. Like it's like I wonder how much of it is simply that, the fact knowing you're there, they have this constant support of someone who knows what they're doing, who's going to be there with them the whole time, who can encourage proper, the mechanics so that everything moves smoothly and as effortlessly as possible. And that in fact, that's the piece that I know my bias was showing earlier, and assuming doulas had certain roles, but that to not medicalize to avoid medicalizing the birth unless absolutely necessary, rather than assuming right up front that it's a medical emergency that a woman's giving birth. And that's another paradigm shift about trust, again, with the trusting the woman's body, that it knows what it's doing. But but that being said, it's used to having elders around, right? It's used to have, like, biologically speaking, we're not meant to give birth alone, but we're meant to have a support system like a doula or an auntie or whoever to guide and make sure everything goes the way it should.
It's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, it's fascinating. And there's just there's so many pieces to it all, and I know that I need to come back again for a few more lifetimes to do all the things that I really want to be doing.
Isn't there's always so much?
Yeah, it's true. It's very true.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do you in fact have any last thoughts for us? Any last words of wisdom about your work, or about advice for people? Or
I think one of the things that that I like to encourage people to do is to seek out a practitioner, a bodywork practitioner of some sort, something that's gonna somebody who's gonna give them opportunities, give their bodies moments to connect, and opportunities to facilitate their own internal healing system. And that can come in so many different types of modalities that you don't have to suffer in silence and alone in this day and age, because there's so much available out there. And if you're lucky enough to have a medical practitioner who is also offering that, then that's awesome. And if you're not, just start Googling terms and finding people in your area, listening to a great podcast like this, and all the other 100,000 that are out there, which I have I have personal podcast overload. I don't know how you guys feel, but I like have little podcast anxiety sometimes because I'm like, I'm behind on my podcast.
Yes.
And there's so much information and I want to listen to it all.
Yes, I think in the podcast world, I don't think it's humanly possible to keep up. I think there's more content being produced than there are hours in the day for a human to listen for a lifetime. It just isn't. It's growing exponentially.
Yeah. But as a person, like when you're trying to figure out like what do you do, like trust your instincts, like does this resonate with me? Like, yeah, I can see how that works. But also like when your instincts are slightly being challenged, when you're like, oh, hey, that seems kind of, like what is that that is being brought up in you? Is there something that that you need to tune into there to see like maybe it is like this person is really not going to be a good supportive circumstance for me and this isn't my style? Or is it like, oh, I've always thought about things in this way, but this person is challenging my belief system and I might need to listen to what that is and why I'm holding on to this other belief. And I may choose to keep it, or I may choose to open up and learn something new. Because there's so much stuff out there that I can see if you really don't know about anything, how overwhelmed you could be just by being like, oh gosh, well this person says I should do that and that person says I should do that, and and it's like, all right, sit with that, meditate on that, whatever it is that your practice that you're comfortable with is, but don't just pretend that there's nothing that can be done.
No, for sure.
Yes. Like we all have our wisdom. We all have our body wisdom, like you were saying. And
Exactly.
Sometimes we just have to listen.
Yeah. And our the way that life is set up, nowadays for most people, there's not a lot of space for that. But you can find that space. There could be less Facebook. There could be less whatever's on television. There could be more forest bathing, which is a term that I just love since I live in the woods.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. So
awesome.
Cool. So how could people get in touch with you if they would like your services on the massage side or the doula side?
Yeah, so I have a nice, simple website, which is probably the best place to go, shannonlwade.com. And you can find my phone number, my email. Probably email is the best way to get a hold of me because I tend to respond to people on my time, which is not always the best time for everybody. But you can find out all about me on that website.
Beautiful. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Shannon. It was a lovely conversation. I learned a ton, so I appreciate that.
Awesome.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say, like, I'm happy to have had this conversation with you guys. You're super welcoming and open, and it makes it comfortable to talk about things. It creates a really good flow. So kudos and keep up the good work.
Awesome. Thank you. We appreciate the compliment.
You're welcome.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Yes.
And to our viewers and listeners, we'll see you next time.